That segues quite well into the the second bit, and I'll kick to you, Wolff, to start this off. But so much of the conversation about Trump, rightfully, is his horrific behavior and racism. But now, as we're looking at the end of the Trump administration, I'd be curious what you think the long-term effects of what you would call the Trump economic policy, because I hear two different stories on this. A lot of people make the argument that most of his economic policies are going to be easily reversed, but I'd be curious if you think that's the case, and just sort of a general sense of what these past 4 years have been like.
Well, I'm not so sure how easily they can be reversed. And maybe I should say it differently. I'm not so clear that the Democrats want to reverse all that much. And let me give you some of the starkest examples. I think it's remarkable that Mr. Biden Mark seems to have had technological...
All I do is I can move and it comes on. You move sometimes, it doesn't come on. I want to switch. I want 1920s technology. All right, carry on.
And you're in a rich university. That's
why. This is it. This is why technology is bullshit. I hope that we get onto this.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to get to it soon.
Look, for example, at the careful way that the Biden administration is not dissociating itself from the anti-China drumbeat of the Trump administration. Come on, this was an obvious moment. If you didn't want this deteriorating relationship to get worse between what are arguably the ascending and the descending power, and that's a very dangerous combination, history teaches us, you would want to say something, do something. They're not. And I find that frightening, and I find that significant. Here's another example. We thought, or some of us thought, that the turn away, the nationalism, the economic nationalism that Steve Bannon articulated and Trump, clumsily repeated. I mean, not to say that Bannon's was all that sophisticated either, but at least there was something there. It's not clear to me that the Democrats... Look, the whole world, let me put it different. The whole world is wondering. I have a lot of contacts in Europe, so I'm not talking about much else. But in Western Europe, where I have contact, the whole world there, the political world, and so on, wondering how far into the corporate culture in this country the nationalist turn is accepted, that we are disconnecting, that we are uncoordinating, whatever the hell the words are, we're finished with a global, I don't want to go overboard here, we're not going to undo this stuff, but that the globalization surge is now going to be transformed into a more nationalist, beggar my neighbor repetition syndrome, let's call it. And that the Democrats are not going to undo a good bit of that. Yeah, we'll be nicer to our allies, maybe, at least for a while. But the allies are far from sure.
Yeah.
I can assure you, I really can, that in the highest levels of French, German, Spanish, Italian capitalism, there is an ongoing debate about whether their future is closer with China than it is with the United States. And they're not going to undo that conversation very quickly unless they see a lot more clarity from the Biden administration than anything that has come from them so far to dissuade them. They're covering their own bets, and they're not sure that the descending the United States is not going to be the kind of partner that drags you underwater and drowns you along with them. They don't want to be taken down with the United States. They're a big unit. You put all the EU together, they're as big as the United States, bigger in fact, and they know that, and the Chinese know that, and the Japanese know that, and the Australian. I mean, things are moving that I think will make it possible that we will look back on the Trump administration. We will forget all the clumsy grotesquerie but we will see some shifts in economics that really weren't his doing, that he was enacting processes that will continue.
I think that's absolutely right. Here's a couple of ways to think about it. In what seemed to be at the time a typically Trumpian move, the US ambassador to the OECD about 6 months ago withdrew the United States from cooperation over a minimum global corporation tax. They just said, we're done, we're out. And the Europeans, as usual, went, oh, it's so terrible, we're trying to do so hard, the French have got the tax, etc. Well, what the Americans figured out was pretty much all those taxes would be paid by half a dozen American firms that constitute 25% of the global stock indices. It's the FANGs plus Tesla and the associated firms. The Europeans have no digital platforms at scale. They talk in terms that make absolutely no sense about a digital Mittelstand, which basically tells you literally don't understand anything about the sector at all. And increasingly, if you look at the dispersal of profits across the world, what you find is a very small number of very big firms that don't employ too many people earn most of the profits. Their key suppliers still employ a lot of people and they make decent profits. And everybody else is in the long tail of you're getting nothing, right? Now, if you're the United States, intellectual property rights, monopoly position, not paying taxes are integral parts of your business model. That's what's there. Is it any other Democratic or any other Republican administration going to come in and change that? Absolutely not, because it benefits us. That's exactly where that is. To me, the other thing about this is very interesting. You want to bring Trump up, we have to deal with this. Why did his vote share go up? Why did he make inroads into people he calls rapists and murderers? Why do working class women like that patriarchy and that offense? Right? I think we need to think long and hard about this. And one of the parts of the story is the following. The Democrats have zero credibility amongst the American working class because they have witnessed nothing but relative decline under their watch. Right? Let's take that as the baseline. Now, there's lots of things going on. There's the struggle for 15. There's better organization. There's a whole bunch of things that have gone on in this. But there's also the little Twitter fight that happened in 2018 between Trump and the Fed, where he basically was bemoaning the fact that they were trying to thinking about raising rates. And of course, the intelligent community of which I am a part, and we are a part, was like, oh, that Trump, he's terrible. He doesn't understand independent central banks. He's underestimating the risk of inflation. Bullshit, right? So basically what happened was the Republicans said, we're going to do a game of chicken with the Fed. We're going to do our massive tax cuts for our top constituents, but we're also going to spend a ton of money. We're going to run the economy really, really hot, and we dare you to raise interest rates, because if you do, it's going to be on you, and we're going to totally blame you for it. What happened? In 2017, 2018, and 2019, wages for the bottom 20th percentile and 40th percentile of the US labor market went up 3 years in a row for the first time in years. They actually experienced material improvement. Now, there were many factors going into that, but that's part of why that message, that resonance, that Trump phenomenon gained votes. The Democrats went into this as a referendum on COVID and decency. They nearly lost the election. They won it by slivers in half a dozen states. Let's not overestimate this. Trumpism is alive and well domestically, and the structural stuff that we've talked about internationally is there too. This is not changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely. I think it's definitely there. It will be interesting, though, to see, and I'd be curious if your thoughts on this, Ben, how well you think because so many of Trump's economic policies really are, GOP playbook with, a fairly, whatever, he used gross, but, effective messenger, like he was able to, he knows how to use the media and things like that. How well do you think, Trumpism will be able to last without him sort of at the head of the movement, without him being in government, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you mean by Trumpism. I think that the particular rhetorical appeal that Trump had, I could actually see Republicans having a lot of trouble recapturing, and that is, it is part of the reason, right? Like, I think that it's good to have a materialist analysis of these things, but also that, some of this was about his particular rhetorical pitch and the cultural war politics of that. I mean, like, that is some of the reason why, the election, was close as it was, and why so many people who don't normally vote came out, and voted for him this time. And I could see saying that, like, if you have some like second drawer Trump, right, some Josh Hawley type, trying to fill that role in the future, that like that might just not work as well, rhetorically. I mean, once you've had that good uncut Colombian, Trump, then like this sort of this stuff that's all mixed up with baby powder, like Josh Hawley or whoever, some regular, Republican politician who's trying to play Trump.
I do not want the idea of got politicians anywhere near my nose. Stop this right now.
Yeah, fair enough. But as you point out, and this is a really important point, that despite that economic nationalist rhetoric that Professor Wolff was talking about earlier, which honestly, even in Bannon's case, I think is very often it's more a matter of rebranding often than it is a matter of substantive policy differences. Like, I remember thinking, like, after hearing all this stuff, they're this different kind of right-wing, economic populism. And then you actually start looking at the details. And even if Bannon had gotten what he wanted in the Trump administration, which he didn't, what that would have meant was raising the top marginal tax rate back to like closer to what it was in the Clinton era. Right. and spending a little bit of it on infrastructure, it was nothing. And certainly, something, actually, I remember Michael pointing out after Bannon went on the Red Scare podcast, and lots of people were mad at them, because they were platforming this monster. But he said, no, he liked it because they were asking him a question that nobody normally asks him, which is, you're such a populist, why don't you support Medicare for all? And he just doesn't have a good answer to that. Again, a lot of it's just regular republicanism with better, it's just Reaganite republicanism with better branding. Like when Bannon says deconstruct the administrative state, that sounds very edgy and a little scary, and also oddly a little bit like something Foucault would say. But what does he actually mean by it that's not just deregulation? Right. And certainly, and that's Bannon. Trump, I think that, I think some of the policies that Professor Wolff identified, especially the trade war with China, were somewhat new, right? There were continuations of things that happened before. There were continuation to some extent, or break to some extent, and I share his pessimism that that Biden and the Democrats, will really reverse course dramatically on that. But certainly domestically, what did Trump do? Other than mismanage the COVID crisis quite as badly as he did, maybe, but but economically, what did Trump do that Mitt Romney wouldn't have done? It's not clear to me. I mean, he did, he was all about the tax cuts. He certainly, he stuffed the National Labor Relations Board with hardcore union busters. He made very little effort to do anything meaningful to fulfill all the lies that he told in places like Youngstown about how he was going to bring the jobs back, or West Virginia, with the coal mines, the coal industry. As of right now, is actually employing fewer people than it did when Trump took office. So I think that just to try to connect the two strands here, right, the rhetorical and the substantive, my hope is that when Trump leaves, and if he doesn't, come back like, Teddy Roosevelt to, run again later, in a few years, that, when it is somebody who's much less convincing in that sort of role, than Trump is, then some of those voters might start to see, oh, wait, there was no there. There, like you said, jobs, make America great, economic nationalism. But then what do you actually do other than to line the pockets of your friends? And I hope more people will notice that. But my fear is that they won't have any reason to, if the Democrats keep on nominating people like Biden and Harris, who can't make that kind of strong contrast.
If I could add just something, let me talk a little bit about West Virginia, because you brought it up, and it's a good example. West Virginia used to be, until around the year 2000, a 100% solid Democratic state, very pro-union, very much involved with the miners' union in the coal fields and so on, and just delivered for the Democratic Party over and over again. But in both 2016 and 2020, went overwhelmingly for Trump. Solid Republican Trump. Currently, they are, I believe, the number one state in the United States for what is now euphemistically called food insecurity. You know, we used to call it hunger.
Poverty, yeah.
And anyway, 1 out of 7, I just did some work on it. 1 out of 7 citizens of West Virginia is now receiving distributions of free food based on demonstrating that their families don't have enough to eat on a regular basis. That's 1 in 7 of the people. Roughly 250,000 out of roughly 1.8 million as the population of that state. Okay, why? Well, it's a little bit what Mark said before. It is a disgust with the Democratic Party for having not only not built on the tradition or history of the Great Depression, which is when they all went Democratic because of Roosevelt and all of that. They're disgusted. The Democrats, you know, presided over the collapse of the coal industry, they presided over the collapse of West Virginia as a place. Nothing was substituted, no solutions were found, and they became a place of, you know, opioid self-destruction.
Of despair, yeah.
Unspeakable economic catastrophe, right? And they're angry at the Democrats. And they're giving the Democrats the middle finger. They're voting Republican. I don't believe, I really do. I think it's an insult of those people to say of them they're not voting their economic interest. That's not true. They are. Now, they're doing it in an impetuous way. Well, what would you expect? They've been literally screwed for decades. They're going to give you the fingers, about all they can do. And they're going to vote for that orange clown. They know that their chances of getting anywhere with the Republican Party, which, by the way, in that state is owned and operated by the coal company executives, they know they're not. Well, they're not stupid. They really aren't stupid people. They know. They don't think politicians are going to do anything for them. So they might as well vote for the Republican who at least says some bullshit.
It's a politics of recognition. He recognizes them in a way that the Democrats don't. Yeah, totally.
To me, it's a little bit like watching the British working class vote for Brexit. What the hell is that got to do?
No, absolutely. It's not the EU's problem. Here's a slightly different cast on the same thing. If you look at the electoral map, start in Alaska, go to the Dakotas, go through Oklahoma, get to East Texas, turn left, go right along the coast of Louisiana, come up, go up and end in West Virginia. You have the heartland of the Republicans. What is it that all of those states do? They refine, extract, move, and play with carbon and carbon assets. They are also the home of steel, coal, and other declining sectors. Now look at what the Democrats want. They need lots of power on the coast, but they'd like it to be electric and they'd like it to come from solar or renewables. In other words, there is now a disconnect of fate between the economic models of these two parts of the country. And those people in West Virginia aren't just angry and giving the finger. They know that basically the Green New Deal is a notion that coal miners become coders. And they know bullshit when they see it because they know that that's not going to happen. So essentially, the Democrats' economic model, given the way that it is pronounced and is articulated as the just transition, and we care about inclusion, etc., just sounds that we don't factor into this. We are not part of this. You don't give a shit about us. This is more proof of that fact, right? And we're as well throwing our lot in with the coal executives because at least we'll have jobs.
Yeah, and I think that, like, to be fair, you know, the Green New Deal, which is of course is not the platform of the leadership of the Democratic Party. Remember, Nancy Pelosi called it the green, you know, the Green Dream or whatever was her phrase. But I think that one problem about the Green New Deal is, you know, as stated, it's great, but I think to tie into something that Mark just said, I think because of people's recent experience, because that was like what you said, Mark, is exactly what the Obama administration policy was. It was, we'll open up some, technology training centers in Appalachia, which is basically a elaborate way of saying stop complaining and just learn how to code. And so when they're told, some Democrats want to do really extreme environmental stuff, unfortunately, what a lot of people hear is, so you're going to just do like more of the same. It's going to be a more extreme version, that they have, that they take seriously the idea that the coal jobs will go away because they have been going away. So why, of course, they'll take that seriously. But they don't take seriously, and this connects with what Richard was saying about the people voting, allegedly voting against their economic interests. They don't take seriously the idea that any of the stuff that's supposed to be done for them is going to happen, because they have learned to believe that you can't actually impact people's lives with politics in that way. That whatever politicians might say, you're not actually going to have programs, to make their lives better if they win.
Think about the Democrat strategy, the electoral strategy of this election is just passed, right? Essentially, there's a thing in the middle called 80 million working class people. And they drew a box around it that went urban, suburban, middle class, technology, public sector worker, university graduate, everything except what was in that box. Right? There was no attempt. You look at who the Democrats have advisors, where they draw their elites from, where they draw their campaigners from. It's basically the Ivy League plus. Given the collapse of the union movement, they have absolutely no organic connections to these communities in any way at all. When you think about the excitement around the Trump rally, right, it's a community event for a community that feels completely ignored. What do the Democrats have? They've got nothing like this.
Totally, and this is to Richard's point, right? That because people know that if all you're talking about is training, well, look, I mean, there's a world difference between being trained to do a job and actually being offered a job at the end of the process, doing it, and so that's just a nothing. Trump's saying that he'll bring the jobs back. It's bullshit, but like at least he's doing people the favor of offering them some bullshit that pretends to address their concern. And really, I think that Green New Deal, I think that's pretty good framing, but I think we really need to go into the teeth of what the gap is there and say, green jobs for all, be very explicit about this, that you're not just going to do something to hope that a job materializes in the future, that no, the government is going to give you a job right now.